Welcome to Lives Beneath History. Weppem Nofret stands ankle-deep in limestone dust, copper chisel angled carefully in his calloused hands as the sun burns over the Giza Plateau. He is a laborer in the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt, summoned from his village along the Nile to shape stone for Khufu's rising pyramid. Around him, thousands work in ordered rhythm, each strike of the mallet binding their strength to the king's eternal horizon. This is his story. The foreman's voice rose over the clamor of the quarry. It carried easily across stone and dust, harsh and scraping, as if something inside his throat resisted every word. Weppem Nofret had come to dread that sound during his 3 months here on labor duty. It cut through the steady pounding of mallet on chisel and settled directly in his chest. He had never cared much for the place or for the work itself. Each morning, before the light had fully cleared the horizon, he felt the weight of it waiting for him, cutting and hauling the great limestone blocks up the slope toward the building site, demanded more from his body than tending barley fields along the southern banks of the Nile. Farming had never pleased him much either, but at least there, he knew the rhythm of the seasons and the soil beneath his feet. Here, the earth had been stripped away to expose pale stone, and the days were measured by how many blocks could be shaped before the sun began to sink. To make matters worse, the beer tasted wrong. It was thinner than the thick, grain-heavy brew made in his village. It filled his stomach, but did not sit the same. He suspected more water was stretched into each jar. Still, it was plentiful, and plentiful beer mattered more than flavor after a day in the quarry. By the third bowl in the evening, a steady warmth spread through his head, dulling the ache in his shoulders and forearms. The buzz helped him endure the long nights in the barracks, where men from every stretch of the two lands lay shoulder to shoulder on reed mats. Some spoke in accents that twisted familiar words into something strange. Yet they all rose at the same hour and lifted the same tools. The foreman was shouting again, and Weppem Nofret recognized the direction of the voice before he lifted his head. It was his turn to take up the copper chisel. He set down the smoothing stone he had been using and stepped toward the block marked for shaping. The limestone here was pale and fine-grained, softer than the harder stone that came from deeper quarries, but it demanded care. He crouched, set the tip of the chisel against the marked line, and adjusted his grip. The trick was never to drive the copper straight into the stone. Copper was soft, strike too directly, and the edge bent or split. He had learned that lesson during his first week. The chisel had flattened at the tip, and the foreman's voice had followed. The broken tool had to be sent to the furnaces, melted down, poured again into a mold, cooled, and hammered into shape. It took time, and time lost meant blocks delayed. Now he tilted the chisel slightly, shifting the angle with each strike so the stone flaked away in thin, controlled layers. The mallet's wooden handle had worn smooth where his palm gripped it. Around him, dozens of men performed the same motion. The sound merged into a steady, metallic rhythm that vibrated through the soles of his feet. He worked along the marked edge, checking the straightness with a cord dipped in red pigment and snapped against the surface. The overseers insisted on clean lines. Blocks that did not sit flush wasted effort higher up on the structure. He had begun to understand how the entire enterprise depended on precision at every stage. When the sun climbed higher, the heat reflected from the pale stone and pressed against his skin from below as well as above. Sweat ran down his back. Water carriers moved among the workers, dipping cups into clay jars. He paused only long enough to drink, then returned to the chisel. The foreman walked between the rows of blocks, staff in hand, watching for carelessness. By midday, the shaped block lay ready for transport. Wooden sledges waited. Teams of men looped thick ropes around the stone. Another group poured water ahead of the runners. Weppem Nofret joined the hauling team, shoulders pressing against the rope. At the signal, they leaned forward together. The sledge resisted, then shifted, then began to glide with a heavy scraping sound. When his turn hauling ended, he climbed to the quarry's lip. Before him stood Khufu's horizon. Its sides were stepped for now, ramps clinging to its faces. Even from this distance, he could see the careful order of the work. He had never seen anything so vast before arriving here. He understood floods. He had seen the Nile rise to high one year, creeping toward the reed walls of his home. He had watched his father measure the water against carved marks in a stone near the riverbank. If this monument ensured balance, then his months here were a fair exchange. In the evenings, the men returned to the barracks. Bread, onions, dried fish, and beer. Labor duty did not last forever. At night, lying on his mat, he flexed his hands. Limestone dust had worked into the creases of his skin. Sometimes he dreamed of water moving gently past papyrus reeds. During his second month, he had worked near the ovens where broken tools were repaired. He had watched copper soften and glow before being poured into molds and hammered into shape. Seeing the labor behind each tool had changed how he held his chisel. A broken edge meant labor multiplied elsewhere. Occasionally, an overseer from higher authority walked through the site in clean linen, speaking quietly with the foreman. Weppem Nofret wondered how many layers of command stood between him and the king. Order required structure. Each man had his portion of responsibility. During one afternoon when wind swept across the plateau, work slowed. The pyramid's outline blurred, then re-emerged. As his third month drew toward its end, what once seemed impossibly vast had become familiar. One evening, he stood outside the barracks and looked toward the dark silhouette of the pyramid. He thought of his village far to the south. Here, thousands worked toward a single purpose. The work was hard. Yet when he climbed from the quarry and saw Khufu's horizon rising against the sky, he felt the same conviction. He would return home carrying more than rations and wages. His labor rested within the great structure, rising from the desert. Generations hence, long after his name faded, the pyramid would remain. That was enough for him. Long after kings are named and their monuments measured, the marks of quieter hands remain within the stone. Weppem Nofret's name was never carved upon the outer casing, never spoken in temple rites, yet his labor rests in the courses that still hold their line against the desert wind. History remembers the pharaoh who ascended to the sky, but it was sustained by men who rose before dawn and worked until the light faded. In the shadow of greatness, ordinary lives carried the weight of eternity. Their footsteps have vanished from the sand, yet their effort endures in silence. The past seen differently. Thank you for listening to Lives Beneath History.